is August 10th, 2009, and I'm Carol Hornbuckle. I'm interviewing Maury Reavis. Maury, we're talking about the 30s, and you were a young boy then. What did your parents do to earn money? What were their jobs?
There were no jobs available. They'd take day labor. Somebody wanted corn scooped onto a load of corn, or something like that. And my dad did the mechanical work. He was a good mechanic, and he fixed a lot of mostly automobiles, tractors too, but there weren't many tractors around then.
Mm-hmm.
And but one of the bad things about it is he did a lot of work he didn't get paid for.
Because no one had any money.
That's
right.
right. Yeah. Then he worked down at Henry Fields. Henry Fields, was way ahead of its time as a mall. As my memory recalls, Gamble's store was located there, and Dad did get a job for them in the tire and battery department. And I remember being down there on a Saturday and went in with him for him to get paid, and I think he made around $12 for the week. And
Wow.
boy, we thought we were rich, I was the only child, and I was a lot better off than some of the large families. But we had a lot of our cousins, had four of them that almost were like brothers and sisters to me, and they ate a lot of meals with us, shared a lot of food with us, mostly garden stuff,
Mm-hmm.
potatoes we grew. We'd grow about 40 bushel potatoes every year. We grew chickens, and
this was in the town of Shenandoah.
right in town of Shenandoah.
Mm-hmm.
We raised probably 2 head of hogs. We had a pony, and we had a milk cow.
Wow, and you were living on Grant Street at this
Right.
time?
Yeah,
Okay.
we had a large back lot, and we lived with my grandparents on my mother's side. And that side was a cross. And we butchered probably a couple times a year as far as pork. And we did our own curing at home. I injected the hams there, and we also, have you ever heard of frying down pork?
Frying down pork. To get lard? Or
Well, no, they'd both. They would butcher a hog, and this is coming summertime, and no freezers,
right.
And the way that we preserved it was cut all the meat off the hog and put it in large pans in a wood stove and cooked that pork until it was done, and then poured off the fat for lard. And then the pork went in a crock, like sauerkraut crock, like a 10-gallon crock.
Mm-hmm.
Put your pork in there, and then you poured the grease over it. And then that hardened and sealed the top of it. And when you wanted a meal of pork, go out and you take off the fat and pull out the meat and cook it. And then you take the fat and pour back in the crock and reseal the crock. And it was good.
Oh.
It's hard to believe that we preserved it that way, but
Right.
that was through the summertime.
Wow. So did you have any kind of cellar or anything in the ground that you put that in?
No, it's just set on the back porch, screened in
Wow.
back porch. Now, we did a lot of canning, and we had a cellar down there like
Mm-hmm.
all people had, you put your jars down there. Made a lot of sauerkraut. And then in the fall year, Dad would take me along. We'd go out to the farms, and we could buy old roosters for less than 10 cents a pound. And then they cooked those and took all the meat off the bone and then cold packed it. And then we'd eat that during the winter. It was good food too.
Oh, yes. Well, that certainly helped with the food supply.
Have
Did
you
your-
ever eaten canned pork? And
You know, my family never canned meat.
Yeah.
That's before my time, I guess. I remember lockers, and we would have to go get it, but I don't remember any canned meat.
You
No.
missed something.
Yeah. Everyone says
Yeah.
it's wonderful. Now, some of these times when your father didn't get paid for jobs, did people ever give him something, or, like a barter system or anything?
No, it seems to me like they just found some way to make another dollar. I remember Dad and Granddad would go out and cut hedge posts, and all they had was a saw and an axe.
Wow, that's hard wood.
Yes, it is, and they'd be paid a nickel a post.
Oh.
And that was cleaning up the brush and piling it up and piling the posts up, and at the end of the day, whatever they cut was 5 cents a post.
Wow.
How many posts do you think they'd cut today?
Gee, I don't know.
I don't either.
It's hard work. I know that. That hedge, nothing harder than hedge.
No, there isn't.
Hedge wood. So you had to be a little inventive to
Sure
get
they
by.
did. And we learned to help each other. Families that run short of potatoes, and we'd deliver potatoes to them. And we weren't just completely destitute, but tough.
Right, right. When you were in school, and you would have been in school in Shenandoah, where did you go to school, and what do you remember about school?
Well, I remember in 1932, I entered kindergarten at Central School. And it's kind of interesting to note, Spike Swagger, that you well know, he and I entered kindergarten together, and we went through every school through senior high and graduated together. And it was just coincidence that we went to the same school all the time.
Right.
And of course, 1932 was when Roosevelt was elected and started his term in 1933. Consequently, from 1933 until I graduated in 1945, he's the only president I knew. And when he died in April of 45, I remember walking to school with 2 or 3 buddies, and we thought, how in the world are we going to get along without Roosevelt? And but the end of the war was within about 2 weeks in Europe, along with that in Japan.
So you just missed that whole, you were able to finish school before you weren't drafted or anything.
That's right.
Timing was right.
But during my high school, I served in what was called the Iowa State Guard, and they formed a state militia, and a lot of SIRAP, Bill Tarpening, Harold Welch. Those people were World War I era people, and they were our instructors and officers. And we had a fine unit, dressed in military clothes, issued rifles, and we were called on flood duty over the Missouri River down by Hamburg at least once or twice. And it was just a good experience for a young guy.
So you did your elementary years at Central. Was there a junior high building? What was?
Yes. About a year before I finished at Central School, the building up there on the south side of the First Christian Church was a Catholic school that went through 8th grade. And they sold it to the school system, and they made a junior high out of it. And I entered junior high at that building in 1940.
Okay. Do you remember any of your teachers? I suppose you walked to school. You weren't that far from Central School. Do you remember any teachers or anything particular about school activities?
Well, I got to say one thing. Every one of them was a miss. If you got married, you lost your job.
Right.
Because they thought that if you could support yourself. And I had Miss Heaton was my kindergarten teacher. And then I had an old lady by Miss Grable, and Miss Anderson, that ended up being Paul Weldy's wife, and Eleanor Fishbaugh, that became Nate Henshaw's wife, and then she had to quit teaching. And then the principal of Central School was Miss Giffen, and she lived out here on the farm on 59 just north, and I think the McLarens own that ground now. And so I remember pretty well all of them. But Miss Dickinson, she was 5th grade, and I had a lot of respect for them. They had good discipline. So.
And if you got into trouble, you were probably in trouble at home too.
Yeah, well, yeah, you didn't want to tell your folks about it because they'd probably get another one.
Right. About how many students were in your class?
You know, I've had a picture at home I was going to bring you of a class. Oh, boy. In 6th grade here in Central, for some reason, out of probably lack of space, they brought the Broad Street 6th grade up to Central. We had 2 6th grades. Mm. So I imagine we probably had 150 to 200 students in the 2 6th grades. And boy, we had a lot of conflict between the 2 6th grades. You didn't have to worry about anything to do at noon hour because you always fought.
Oh. Fist fights?
Yeah, well, no, most of the time it was all wrestling.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. And what was the discipline for that?
Well, you know, they didn't seem to bother us. You know, they up there at Central, that was all ashes, you know, the playground was. And you tore up your clothing. And then we played another one that you may not want on recording, but we called it Black Man's Tackle. And so you'd start out with one man. He was one of the biggest boys there. And he'd stand out in the middle, and you tried to run by him without getting tackled. Well, if you were tackled, you were on his team. Mm-hmm. And they kept running back and forth until they had them all.
Do you ever remember a game called kitten ball?
Very much.
All right. What is kitten ball?
Well, it's the same as softball.
Okay.
But we played it as a workup. You chose up your team, and what happened was you played the regular positions, and you'd have the batter up to bat, and he could stay at bat as long as he could hit, you know. Mm-hmm. But if you hit a fly ball and you caught it, then he was out, and then everybody moved up a base. Okay. Until you got to bat yourself.
Now, I've heard that there were some organized teams of...
Well, that came on as softball. Okay. Fast pitch softball.
Okay. What do you remember? What did you wear to school?
I wore bib overalls, and I got to the point when I entered junior high, I've still got a picture of that. I still had bib overalls on. I was embarrassed by them. You know, there's probably 3 or 4 of us that my folks thought I couldn't afford anything but bib overalls. Mm-hmm. And consequently, that's what I wore.
Right.
And I didn't like them, but that's what I wore.
Did your mother only wear dresses?
That's all I ever remember. I never saw her in a pair of slacks, and I don't think we knew what slacks were.
What about an apron? She probably always
had an apron.
How often did you get new clothes?
Well, most of the time, coming around Christmas time, but they didn't think they could afford toys. You got one toy, and then they gave you some clothing. And then my mother would say, now, I wanted to wear something new. She says, well, don't wear it. That's brand new. And so I outgrew most of my clothing before I ever wore it.
Oh, what, did you attend a church?
Uh, I only church I attended was called Bible school. And you went to Bible school, a church of your choice, uh, once, I'm not sure it was once a week or once a month. And I had a funny thing in my house. My father was Catholic, and I was baptized Catholic, but never raised Catholic. And my mother was Protestant, but never attended church. And so I attended church at the Methodist Church and also the Presbyterian, but only as Bible school.
Mm-hmm. And this was during regular school time?
Yep.
Right.
You were given, I think it was a morning class, and probably lasted an hour and a half.
Mm-hmm.
And I enjoyed it. Got out of school.
Mm-hmm. Right. Got to walk there and walk
Yeah,
back.
well, see, the Presbyterian Church was right across the street from Central.
Right.
And a lady by Mrs. Burham,
Helen Burham.
Ellen Burham was my teacher there. And down at Methodist Church, used to be an attorney here. Right now, they're the ones that built the annex to the library.
Oh, Wilson.
Well, Wilson,
Yeah.
she taught down there. And I remember those people.
What do you remember about the weather in the 1930s?
You're talking about the hot weather?
Anything you can remember?
Well, I remember you didn't have any deluxe food, You had the basics of some chicken in the summertime. You had fried chicken and cooked a lot of potatoes and just the very basics. We always had chicken, so we had eggs. And we butchered, and we had bacon and ham we home cured. And a lot of cornmeal mush. You ever eat mush?
Yes, I have.
Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then a lot of times they cook mush and eat that as a cereal in the evening, and then left over they let it set up in a pan like meatloaf, then slice it off and fry it serve it with syrup.
Did you get your cornmeal from a local source? I mean, was it a mill?
I can't really say. I'm sure we just bought it at the grocery store.
Okay. Where was the grocery store then?
Well, we had them all over.
Okay. Oh, neighborhood
Residential
groceries.
and supply store that started up down there across from the Shenandoah Floral, and that was a predecessor of Hy-Vee. And then there was a clover farm on the corner of where Cook's Paint, where it was, Radio Shack closed up, empty building. And that was Howard Brennan and his brother that operated it. And then there was let's see, as far as chain type stores, Clover Farm was one. We had a Red and White. We had an A&P store. That was on Main Street. And then we had Burke's Grocery there on Main Street. And we had all kinds of neighborhood stores. I don't think any region in Shenandoah didn't have one. And that was it.
Okay. We talked a little bit about games that you played at school. What kind of indoor games did you play?
Well, we played a lot of checkers. Carom, did you ever play carom?
I've never played, but
Where
I've
you
heard of the game.
Flip them around, kick them around, put them in pockets. That's about the only indoor games that we played a lot of cards. I played with my parents, but that's about it.
What kind of jobs did you have as a young boy at home?
Oh, I took care of the chickens and fed them, and we naturally call it chores, do the chores, and then I'd go down the street and I helped a old neighbor lady milk a couple goats, and she'd get them up on a stand and get the goat milk, and I just enjoyed doing those kind of things, and then I remember my dad and uncle set me up with 50 head of hogs out here at the edge of Shenandoah, and I'd ride my bicycle out there and feed them, and then when they sold them, I usually got the money off of one hog.
Which was pretty good in the...
Well, yeah, it was money in my pocket.
That's right, that's right. Okay, the weather, the heat, the snow, the dust, do you remember any?
Yes, I really do. 36, the winter of 36, you hear it all the time on the weather records, and it was just a terrible fun year because it snowed all the time, and then it came along an ice and sleet storm, and the snow was terrible deep, and it formed a crust on top, and you could walk any place on it, and you could take your sled and you could get on your sled out in our backyard and go right over a fence. It was deep enough that we cleared the fence. And all we thought about was my dad, he worked that winter with Fremont County scooping out roads so people could get in or out. And they'd go out one day and scoop all day and go back, and the next day the road would be full of snow again. They'd scoop out the same road.
What kind of equipment did they have?
A shovel.
Just a shovel?
Mm-hmm.
No mechanical?
No, it was all shovel work. And then the summer come along.
I hope they paid him.
Yeah, they wouldn't hire him any longer because he was in Page County. And he was working for Fremont, and they said, no, we gotta hire Fremont County people. But I also I raised a hatchery here, would sell you first day old chickens, cockerels they call them. When they sexed them, they brought the Japanese in here, and they go through those and pick them out, the pullets and then the roosters. And the roosters, people didn't want them, and I'd buy them for a penny apiece. They were a day old, and I could usually give $1 and then buy 100 of them, and I could salvage 50. The rest of them would die, but I'd have 50 chickens to raise to be eaten,
How did the animals survive that winter?
Well, I'm just aware of those around our house.
Right.
We had a barn, and they were able to go in there, and we somehow had some feed for them, so they did okay. But I imagine around the countryside it was pretty tough.
What about in the summer then? We heard there were some pretty hot summers.
Oh, terrible hot. No air conditioning, and we had a front porch on our house on East Grant, and that's where most of the time we'd try to get some sleep, go out there on the porch and just wait for the cool evening breeze, which there wasn't any. And we didn't have any fans or anything like that, just electricity. The only thing we had electric was each room had a light bulb hung down from the ceiling. And basically, I think that's the only electricity we had. And Dad always say, turn the light off when you leave the room. Didn't want to get over minimum bill, which was $1.
Oh, what we wouldn't get for that kind of bill now.
Yeah.
Well, you've kind of talked about your family having to make changes because of the bad economy. Certainly your dad was pretty inventive about finding jobs. What about Christmas? You said you usually got one toy. Do you remember any of the toys you got in the 30s?
Not much. We had one, fired a marble like a pinball machine, only it was, and it was called Gold Star Game, and all the neighborhood kids would come down and thought that was just great, Probably, I imagine it cost all $2, until I wish I hadn't thrown it away. One time I did throw it away. We had a Christmas tree. It was the ugliest doggone artificial tree you ever saw. It was very sparse on branches, and it had a candle holder in the end of each limb. And but we never burned candles. Afraid we'd catch it on fire. But I doubt if it would even burn. It probably wouldn't burn. Limbs folded up, and oh, you can't imagine. But I wish I had it.
Did you have any special food or anything at Christmas?
We normally had a goose. Very, very seldom did we ever have turkey. You could always get a goose off a farm, and not expensive at all. And an interesting thing about that is when you cook a goose, they're very greasy, and it comes off as a very thick grease. Well, they'd save that grease, and then if you got the croup in the wintertime and started coughing, they'd mix a teaspoon of goose grease and a teaspoon of kerosene and mix that together, and it tastes so bad, you'd put your head under the covers and you wouldn't cough anymore because you didn't want any more of it.
Quite a cure. Birthdays. How did you celebrate birthdays, or did you?
No, we had some kids in for birthdays. I suppose we had a little cake, and I usually have my cousins and a few of the neighbor boys in, and they'd be, make some ice cream as a rule. And you had to buy, when you made your ice cream, you had to buy a chunk of ice, and you put it in the gunny sack and beat it up with an axe or a sledgehammer so you could crush it.
What about the businesses that were in town then in the 30s? What do you remember?
Well, I remember some of them on Main Street. Bowers Dry Goods Store on the north side of Main Street, just this side of Bank, Iowa. Of course, we had several restaurants around town that served sandwiches. Ike Black had a hamburger joint up here in this next block east, and he served on Saturdays. He served 6 hamburgers for a quarter, and every Saturday night my uncle would buy me 6 hamburgers, and I'd sit down on the curb and eat all 6 of them. And I thought I was in 7th heaven.
Do you remember anything about the CCC camp?
Very much. I remember I had an uncle that worked down there I think he was a cook. And all those boys came from all walks of life, and they wore military uniforms, and it was run as a military camp. And we'd go down there on Sundays, and they'd have very good food for them. And Dad would take me down there, and my uncle would make sure that we got a meal down there, better food than we had at home. And it was a very good opportunity for those young men to move into a military-type setting. I think they got $1 a month. No, $1 a day. 30 bucks a month. And on Saturday nights, you'd see Main Street was just really loaded with young guys. And of course, World War II broke that military CCCs up, and then it became a prisoner of war camp until the end of World War II.
Where was that?
It's right down where China Gate is now, that big building at Bob Tyler's. They had those barracks in there, and then after the war, then they moved those barracks over there where Burger King is, and that was a veterans village. You know, the housing was real scarce then, and they, I think they converted those into, each one, I think, formed 4 apartments. And they turned that responsibility over to the Chamber of Commerce to collect the rent. And a lot of people that we know, Bob Book and George Keel's family, and a lot of those people that we knew years ago, when they come back from the war, before they got a house built, that's where they lived.
What about entertainment, movies, swimming, Porter's Lake?
Well, we'd go fishing, get on our bicycles and build ourselves a lunch and ride out to Porter's Lake and on our bicycles and fish and try to get a string of fish. I don't think my parents liked them, but I was always proud of them. And then my mother was very overprotective, and she wouldn't allow me to go fish swimming with all the kids. And so in the summertime, they'd take off on their bikes and head for the swimming pool. And I messed around and rode my bicycle and tried to find something to do. And we had, we had a lot of fun. Everybody in the same boat, so you couldn't complain. There was a lot of other things that we did. You played street hockey, you get a tin can and knock it around and things like that.
What about movies? Any movies?
Well, the best thing about that was the serials. Zenith Theater, that was run by Bruce Holdridge. They would have a movie every Saturday morning for a nickel, and it was a serial, like Flash Gordon, and that was way ahead of his time. He had a rocket on his back and shooting into space, and Buck Rogers, the cowboy, and they'd end that movie that day at a real critical spot. And then next Saturday, they'd continue that serial. You had to go find out what it was. And then in the afternoon, Mayfair Theater, they charged a dime for their cereal, but they also gave you a free candy bar. So they gave you a nickel candy bar and a movie, and so that was our Saturdays.
Is there any one thing from the 30s that had a profound effect on you that you've never forgotten?
Yes, it probably made me over-conservative. Having been in Depression all my maturing years, even started in 1940, there'd be jobs, but they didn't pay much money. As I said, I got 18 cents an hour at the nursery, and if you put in 54 hours, you made about $10. And I'd always stop on Saturday night. I'd get paid, and we usually bought very inexpensive hamburger. It had more grease in it than it did lean meat. But on Rulon up there on the east part of Shenandoah, he sold ground round for 18 cents a pound. And I'd buy me a pound of ground round and some bananas, and I'd take that home and I'd fix me a hamburger, and I'd take a bite of hamburger and a bite of a banana until I had that pound used up.
What about, we haven't talked about hobos or gypsies or
All the
did you have them
time.
at your house?
Yes, you know, and when we never turned one down. Uh, my grandmother always said, you know, you can't turn those people down because one of them might be Jesus. And so that they passed the word along. Now, if you stop at that place, you'll get a free meal. And so we saw a lot of them. I'll bet you 2 or 3 a week would show up around noon hour and took good care of them, respected them, never looked down on them. And I was taught never to look down on those type of people. My dad was very critical on that, that they're just trying to get by.
That's right. That's right. Okay, anything else you'd like to tell us, or things that I haven't asked you that you definitely remember?
Well, I don't really think so. I wrote some notes out. I thought maybe I might refresh my memory. My father went to work for Iowa Power and Light in 1941, and so you think about the Depression being over with. Well, that was 49 cents an hour, and my junior year in high school, the railroad needed help very badly, and they advertised if you were 16 years old, you could come down and work on the railroad on the section. They paid me 62.5 cents an hour, and by that time, Dad was up to 53, and I always kidded him about I made more money than he did.
So this was just after school and Saturdays, or did you work
That was the railroad was always on the weekends.
on the weekends?
Yeah, and they just begged you to. You work 10-hour day, and then they'd beg you to come along and work in the summertime. And by that time, I was offered a job at Iowa Power. That was the end of my junior year, and so I went to work for them. then.
Wow. So that they employed you. That's who you worked for.
May 20th of 1944. That was just about 3 weeks before D-Day, June 6th of 1944.
Wow.
Other than that, you know, since everybody, I've said before,
But you
basically,
finished high school.
oh yes, and then I went on to Central College, and then instead of staying on, I got married. I started going with my wife, and I had a job at Iowa Power, and I liked Central. There's still a lot of respect for it, and I played football for them, and was on a first year was 50% scholarship. I think one semester of tuition, room and board was $185, and I should have went on and finished college, but I guess love took the place of that.
That's right. May have changed your whole life. But it
Well,
sounds like a pretty good life.
I wish I had have finished, but I no regrets.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay. We've been talking with Maury Reavis. This has been August 10th, 2009. Okay, thank you, Maury.
Very welcome. Did a nice interview.